Welcome to Better Health Guy Blogcasts, empowering your better health. And now, here's Scott, your Better Health Guy. The content of this show is for informational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose, treat, or cure any illness or medical condition. Nothing in today's discussion is meant to serve as medical advice or as information to facilitate self-treatment. As always, please discuss any potential health-related decisions with your own personal medical authority.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 80 of the Better Health Guy blogcast series. Today's guest is Dr. Patrick Porter, and the topic of the show is BrainTap. Patrick Porter has been on the cutting edge of brainwave entrainment technology for over 25 years. He was a co-developer of the MC2, the first personal light and sound brainwave training machine, voted Best New Gadget of the Year at the 1989 Consumer Electronics Show. His newest device, BrainTap, is distinctively designed to take the BrainTap technology sessions to the highest possible level with the addition of light and sound frequencies. Dr. Porter is known for developing Positive Changes, the largest self-improvement franchise using mind-based technology, making him a highly sought-after expert within the personal improvement industry. Dr. Porter's successes were featured in the Wall Street Journal, Business Week, People, Entrepreneur, and Inc. magazines, as well as on ABC, NBC, CBS, and the Discovery Channel. He is a licensed trainer of neuro-linguistic programming and is the head of mind-based studies at the International Quantum University of Integrative Medicine. He is the author of 7 books, including Thrive in Overdrive, How to Navigate Your Overloaded Lifestyle, and the bestseller Awaken the Genius, Mind Technology for the 21st Century. Most recently, he co-authored with Dr. Bob Hoffman, Your Flourishing Brain, How to Reboot Your Brain and Live Your Best Life Now, a book that teaches chiropractors why they must focus on neurological health and brain balance to stay on the leading edge of the profession. His upcoming book, BrainTap, The Ultimate Guide to Relaxing, Rebooting, and Strengthening Your Busy Brain, is highly anticipated. Dr. Porter has produced an arsenal of more than 650 audio-recorded motivational programs and creative visualization processes and has sold more than 3 million books and recordings worldwide. And now, my interview with Dr. Patrick Porter. I am a big fan of light and frequency and sound, and I personally use several devices in the realm of physics in my own recovery from Lyme disease and mold illness. I'm really excited today to have Dr. Patrick Porter on the show. I had heard about his BrainTap technology quite a while ago, and then more recently, 3 separate people mentioned it in the course of about a week or two. And so that to me was the sign that it was time for me to start exploring this further and learning a bit more about it. So thanks for being here today, Dr. Porter. I appreciate it very much.
Well, it's great to be here, Scott.
Thank you. Oftentimes, my guests have had their own health challenges that brought them to doing the work they're doing today. I'm curious, what drew you to do the work that you're doing today, and was it the result of your own personal health journey?
Well, it was actually our whole family's journey. So my dad was a very gifted alcoholic. So he had a lot of problems in that area, and I was a very gifted troublemaker. So when my dad got his help, actually was from a program called the Silva Method. Which is a meditation program, and they had what they called the Silva sound. So he taught us how to all go to alpha, that relaxation state. When we talk about frequency response, is a really bizarre sound, but when you hear it in a meditative state, it takes you to alpha, which of course causes relaxation to happen. What we found out was once we started going to alpha as a family, because we started doing it, our grades improved, my sports. Actually, one of my books, I've written 9 books. One of the books is called Awaken the Genius, and I tell the whole story of how basically he tricked me into it because he used it for sports and then just happened to benefit me by doing that. Then when I went back to school myself in psychology, I realized I really didn't want to do that kind of work. I want to do more positive psychology, and it was before that was the thing. So in the 80s, and then my family has a history of weight. My dad at one time weighed over 400 pounds, and my mother was 350. So that's why we started the whole program with the old company I had called Positive Changes, which was a weight loss center.
Oh, okay. Excellent. Yeah, I think when people have a personal story, they're more passionate about what they're doing and really come from a place of wanting to positively influence people's lives. And so that's great. We've all heard for years that stress is a primary driver of health issues, of chronic illness, and yet very few people seem to internalize that message enough to actually make some changes and to do something about it. So I'm interested in your perspective. What is the impact of stress on our health and what you call the 21st century super stress and also sympathetic survival syndrome, which I seem to feel like we're all in to some extent?
Yeah. So let's talk about all the technology we have around us. Even this, I mean, this is awesome because in the 80s, if you wanted to interview me, we'd have to get on a radio show or a TV show. We'd have to fly, meet together, or do it over the telephone. Now we can do it. So this technology we have is great, but it's also causing a lot of stressors on our body, whether it's from the electromagnetic waves it's throwing off to just the stress it's putting on us. If the listeners out there think about for a moment, if they have children especially, and somebody texts you, how quickly do you want to text? Response. Usually it's right away. Well, rats in a maze have what they call a dopamine response when they get the little bell ringing. Well, that's what happens to us with our cell phones. You know, we send out a text, we want a response right away. We call somebody, most people, in fact, if you're under 25, calling is kind of the last thing you do. everything is done through text or email. So this is part of the stress we're talking about. If they put our grandparents in the middle of Times Square, they say that through the neurological shock, their body would go under. They would probably die. You know,
Wow.
just from that much, there's so much information that the body's receiving. Some of that information is good. Most of it isn't. You know, so our body's feeling that. So how does stress affect our body and well-being? Well, first of all, we believe all stress is brain stress. So when the brain is not sending the right signals to the gut, for instance, if we don't experience, let's say we're in high sympathetics, which is high beta, then our brain is basically telling our body that we're in fight or flight. So we could be taking the world's greatest supplements and the body doesn't, the nutrition doesn't get absorbed by the body. There's more neurological connections in the gut than there are in the brain. But if the brain doesn't have the oxygen, the nutrients, because it's fighting for its life, the primitive nature of our nervous system says, hey, we're in fight or flight. Let's move all the blood, all the oxygen out to the extremities so we can get away from that saber-toothed tiger. Now we can't digest those great nutrients. And then we're proving, unfortunately, the medical community right that says all we're doing is having very expensive urine when we take supplements. But that's because they're not relaxed. When people pray over their food, there's been a lot of research that shows and there might be a higher purpose to this too, but I'm talking just scientifically. Scientifically, what it does is it sets up our body to metabolize, digest, and use the nutrients that are in that food. If we eat in front of the television, for instance, one of my secrets to success, I'd say, is if I really am too happy, I'm too overjoyed, I know exactly what to do. All I have to do is turn on CNN. You know, if I turn on the news, immediately I'm going to start to stress out. I'm going to start to worry. I'm going to start to create fear. All of those negative emotions have a few things in common. Number one, they stop our breathing, which then stops our digestion, which just stops our metabolism, which causes our brain to spike into this beta consciousness. Now, beta is good for what we do when we're driving our car, balancing our checkbooks, things like that. But really, our body needs all of our different brain waves. So we need to have those. And that's why we crave, as a species, really, we crave getting out of ourselves. That's why, unfortunately, a lot of people do this by doing drugs or other things, which is one way to do it. It's not very good for the body, but it does satisfy that need. But when we get into these altered states of relaxation, think about our bodies themselves, the stress we're under. The average person used to sleep over 12 hours a day. Of course, there used to be an expression, you're not burning candles at both ends, right? Well, we don't burn candles anymore. We just turn on the light switch. Now we're awake. And most people don't use Ott lights. John Ott, who created full spectrum lights, they're using these lights that are the cheapest they can get at the grocery store. And so they don't understand what that's doing to their body. So their body there's not just biofeedback when you go to the clinician to do neurofeedback or biofeedback. Our body is a biofeedback machine everywhere we go, in every condition. Our body is always trying to match its environment, or it's fighting off the environment. It's basically always trying to create homeostasis. So our environment is causing this.
I mean, it's really amazing in our modern world that any of us can survive the stressors that we come into contact with. And so one of the things that I've heard you say in other talks is you talk about circumstances, and you talk about the fact that circumstances don't determine the stress, but it's our thoughts, beliefs, our reaction, our action. And so is this to suggest that we can use something like the BrainTap system, for example, that we shift how we respond to circumstances? And even though the circumstances themselves may not change, the stressors may not change, but because we have new thoughts and beliefs and ideas and ways that we see the world, that those circumstances may not produce the same stress response in the body.
Yeah. Well, let me put it this way. When we've done something before, the neurons in the body, this 100 billion neural bit processor goes to work creating a pattern. It says, will this ever happen again? Is this an accident? Well, so it happens once. The brain doesn't really give it much value. But let's say we impact that with emotion. Now the brain says, this was emotional. I need to remember it. So now it creates a pathway. If it happens twice, the brain goes, this isn't just an accident. This is a pattern. And then it happens 3 times. The brain literally creates a neural circuit to recall that memory. That's why memory systems work. If you learn something new, you recall it within 5 seconds, then you use it again within 24 hours. All these things are about how the brain processes it. But if we face new things all the time, it's great for building neural pathways. But if it's under a stressful situation and our belief system says, I can learn really well, I do well under stress, then the brain goes, okay, poop, 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 poop. It does it all for you. But let's say you have low self-esteem, low self-confidence, you're not eating well, you're living on, unfortunately, the American diet. You think you can get everything you need in a can, bottle, or wrapper with ingredients we can't read, and all these things. And so the body doesn't have the resources it needs. So now it's going to have to rob Peter to pay Paul. You're going to get through it, but to what extent? We can do that when we're younger. We can eat junk food every day. Somebody says, well, I used to eat this way for 20 years. Well, that's why you're this way today, because you did that for 20 years. So what happens with something like the BrainTap or using binaural beats, isochronic tones, light therapy, there's a lot of ways to get to that place of homeostasis and getting the body to work within its true nature, which means to really get outside of the environment you're in for a minute. Everybody talks about uptime. We're Americans. We want it fast. We want it free. We want a limo to pick us up to go get our bonus check. Those are the things that happen. But the reality is we also need downtime. So if we don't have that downtime, what the brain does during that time is we can literally, through light, sound, and vibration, guide the brain through a series of relaxing programs that are all different. There's algorithms we've created that take it through. It actually mimics sleep. So that while you're going through those in the health, and this is why it's so important for people to go through them, is when let's say you're in beta, you're creating dopamine as the neurotransmitter. The brain's telling the gut, hey, make dopamine. But when you go into alpha, now it's saying make acetylcholine. If you don't ever get alpha, if you don't ever have those creative outlets and things like that, your brain never gets the right amount. And then when you get into, when you're getting into GABA and things like that, all the different brain waves tell the brain and body to work together. So nothing's isolated. It doesn't live in a vacuum. Either it's going to have it or it's not going to have it. And so this body-brain connection, if you will, that's why we use heart rate variability a lot when we're working with our doctors to show, because if there's coherency, which means the heart is communicating with the brain, the heart is the only organ that literally instructs the brain. So there's 4 nerves that go directly from the heart to the brain. So when you're doing meditation and you're really listening to your autonomic nervous system, you're relaxing, you're breathing. Your breathing reflects, the reflection of the breath reflects to the heart, which reflects to the brain. So there's this cybernetic loop, if you will, that's working to relax. And what we've done is we found there's technology out there that can help people to accelerate this process. Now, we didn't have that before the 70s.
So let's talk a little more about the sympathetic dominance that you were talking about. So let's say in a lot of my listeners, Lyme disease, mold illness, chronic fatigue, chronic health challenges that have gone on for years and years. And so when our nervous system is in this sympathetic dominant mode, we're in this fight or flight or freeze kind of response. My understanding is we can't really heal, that our body's under attack. And to get into this healing mode, we need to really be in rest, digest, and restore and heal, which is the parasympathetic side of the nervous system. Mm-hmm. So is one of the goals of the BrainTap system to shift us to a more parasympathetic state, and how important is that in healing from a long-term chronic illness?
Right. There's 2 main reasons why it's important to get into parasympathetics. One is your brain only detoxes in the deepest levels of sleep, called deep delta sleep, we call it, or level 4 sleep.
That's a big message right there, because everyone dealing with Lyme disease, in my opinion, toxicity is as big of a problem as the microbial burden itself. So that's really big.
So think about it. Everybody talks about the blood-brain barrier to get supplements in, but there's also this blood-brain barrier to get the toxins out. In science, in 2016, actually, American Scientific, which is a magazine out there, they want to look at it in the March issue. They talk about this lymphatic system in the brain. Now, most health practitioners that are listening to this already know this, but the medical community discovered it in 2016. So, that's the kind of the way it works, like Columbus discovering America, with nobody in it. So we have this lymphatic system, and what they found was that when we go into sleep paralysis, which we all do, or we should do 4 to 5 times every night, when we're going through sleep, we're going through these cycles of sleep, these waves of sleep. We go from beta being awakened to alpha, theta, delta, and then we kind of go from alpha to theta to delta. We don't get into beta because we'll wake up. But as we're going through there, we're instructing the body to make the neurotransmitters we need for tomorrow. But it's also, when we get into the deep state of delta, the brain gets into a catatonic state. In that catatonic state, which a lot of the listeners have probably woke up and they couldn't move. They were in this, they call it sleep paralysis. And most people have experienced it at some point in their life. They literally woke up in the middle of a cleaning cycle for their brain. So when we get older, unfortunately, as the stress happens and we don't reach the deeper levels of sleep, we disrupt that function. And then we have what's called leaky brain syndrome, because the toxins are going to come out. They're just not going to come out in the way that the body is designed to. So think of it like a toilet flushing. When we're in that deep sleep paralysis, the body, we don't do anything. The nervous system we're kind of locked out of the system. It dumps the toxins out a little bit at a time, not at the whole, couldn't handle it if everything dumped at one time, but it knows how to do that. So that's really important. The next step is that when you're in sympathetic overload all the time, that's like putting the gas on. Most people, unfortunately, get an illness. Now they have the gas on full bore and they have the brake on full bore, because intuitively their body knows, I need to rest, relax, and digest. But their body's saying, hey, we've got to get rid of these bugs. We got to do whatever we can to get rid of these vermin, whatever it is. So it's like fighting itself over and over again. So we need to, what the BrainTap does, or meditation relaxation techniques do, we just found a way to do it very easily. But what happens is it basically lets off the brake for a little bit. So when you need the gas, you have the gas, and then takes off the gas and puts on the brake when you need it. And then you cannot heal at all. There is no healing that happens if you're in sympathetic overload.
It's interesting, the interview I did recently with Kelly Halderman, one of the things that got me really excited about your system was she was measuring her level of depth of sleep with an Oura ring. And when she started using your system, she commented that the time she spent in that deepest level of sleep was, I believe, more than double, which is pretty significant, right? I mean, we know sleep is critical for healing. And so that was really exciting to me. One of my mentors, Dr. Dietrich Klinghardt, talks about chronic illness being a bad habit of the brain, essentially. So I'm wondering, do you resonate with that? Is it a bad habit of the brain? And if so, how long does it take to change the brain's bad habits?
Yes, I agree totally, because the brain habituates. It starts thinking the negative is the positive. So it starts thinking this is normal. Like everybody says, my brain's functioning normally. Well, what's normal for you and what's normal for somebody else, there is no normal. In fact, if we look at the American norm, nobody wants to be normal. You want to be way above that, way above that standard. So in the process, the brain habituates to it because the brain is always conserving energy. It's going to look for the path of least resistance. So if that's eating junk food, having problems, having illness, whatever it is, even though that's stressful for the person experiencing it, to the brain, those neural pathways are there. You ask it to do something else, now it's going to take energy. And when we measure the nervous system when somebody's dealing with an illness, that energy is going to fight the illness, and they don't have the same energy level that they need for other things. But if they're doing other things, then they don't have the energy to fight the illness. We always have 100% energy, but where are we putting that energy? So how you break that habit is, when Harvard and Stanford did their research, they said it takes 21 days to create a change. Well, that's just the start of it. because the 21 days, they said it only happens in 21 days if you use relaxation and visualization techniques. Now, if you don't, they found out it took 18 months. So when somebody's out there doing these things on their own and they did perfectly for 6 months, but think of those neural pathways like let's say that we're walking on a path and this path is around the mountain, and we don't know that just if we would walk 10 feet over, we could see a beautiful vista and all this. But then finally somebody comes back and says, there's this beautiful vista, but you've got to walk out here before the spring, before all the vegetation grows, you can see this thing. But if enough people walk that path, pretty soon that pathway is going to be there and everybody can go out there and see that vista. But if you don't ever build that pathway, that's the neuro training. So we always think it takes about 3 months to really, even with visualization, relaxation techniques in my research since the 80s, I found that somebody to create a new habit, a new pattern, they have to use the relaxation, visualization techniques. They've got to commit to the time, the energy, and the effort. And they've got to be willing. I always tell my clients, you got to be willing to do something terribly at first if you want to be able to do it well. So many people think, I should just eat perfectly clean. Somebody who's been eating garbage their whole life, and then they get Lyme, and then they go, I'm going to start eating clean, and then they don't do it, and they beat themselves up. The emotional impact of beating themselves up is worse almost than the Lyme, because the brain has to create the chemical corresponding emotional reaction, which happens physically, mentally, and emotionally. So all that wear on the body, we need to keep in a very upbeat, positive, one day at a time approach. And when the brain is such a way that when you have an illness, every time we've ever done any brain scans with people, they have over 60 to 80% delta brainwave activity. Now, you would think that's what you need, but you don't need that when you're awake. It's like running with a parachute behind you. It's draining all your energy. So it's like an energy leak. We need to be in beta and alpha when we're awake, and then when we purposely go into a state of relaxation, we can go into deep delta if we want. But when you're trying to be awake and you have that much delta going, it takes so much energy out of the person they can't heal.
So you are the inventor of the BrainTap system, which I have here and have been just starting to use and excited about. And you use a combination of light and sound, frequency and vibration to help shift the body. So can you tell us a little about the BrainTap technology, how many years of research has gone into it? And when you wear the headset and you have the visor going, what is it that the body's receiving from the ears and from the eyes? And what's the purpose of those stimuli to both the body and the brain?
Okay, so let's start with the lights in the ears. Maybe you can show the viewers that. There's lights in the ears when you turn it on, and people go, why do you have lights in the ears? Well, we designed that because that light looks solid, but it's really not solid. It's flashing at 194 hertz frequency. That's a Noget frequency that instructs the bones and the muscles to relax. So think of it like the sympathetic system's going like this, and then we send this signal in, and without your conscious mind, it has nothing to do with what you consciously think, it relaxes them. Basically, in Dr. Noget, there's 7 frequencies of the body, and if they're all tuned and in tuned and balanced, then you're going to be healthy. If any of those are out of tune, then there'll be an imbalance in that area, which will cause a dis-ease in that area of the body. So we use that frequency because we're dealing with the brain. So we're bringing that in. We did that first for autistic kids because, of course, they can't take instruction like we do. So we wanted to get them to relax, and it was so great to see the kids put it on. They're passing out. The parents are going, what happened to my kid? And then in 10 minutes, they're back, and they're relaxed and calm. I said, well, we're just training their body because they can't learn the same way. And they said, why don't we do that with everybody? So we built the unit so that everybody would have that. Now, also within the hearing, we're putting a frequency in, an isochronic tone and a binaural beat. These are 2 different frequencies that the brain hears. And there's a reason we have both of them, because somebody might not have perfect hearing, so binaural beats won't work as well. So we're going to, let's say we want 10 hertz frequency, which is alpha. We're going to put a 200 hertz frequency in one ear and a 210 in the other. The brain doesn't hear those 200s. It only hears 10 hertz frequency because it always matches and mirrors and gets the difference. Now, what we've done with a doctor out of Russia, his name is Dr. Kaplan, out of Moscow University, we've licensed his algorithm. I used to do them myself when I was with Light and Sound Research, but he's got a lot more sophisticated equipment. So we went with him and we said, how quickly can we move somebody from beta to theta? How quickly can we move somebody from alpha to delta? And so we've used his algorithm to change up these frequencies. And we mirror those frequencies with the isochronic tone, which is a mono frequency. So if somebody doesn't even have hearing in one ear, they can still get the result. It's not going to be as strong as coarse to have that cortical response with both. Now, sound is important, but only 10% of the population are auditory. But we need that to create a holographic effect. The reason we use lights in the eyes, when your eyes are closed, we're triggering the optic nerve, which is there's a bunch of nerves up here for those that are the frontal lobe. That's the reasoning power. What typically happens, if I was to put somebody on an EEG and do a brain map of them, and I ask them to close their eyes, first thing's going to happen is their frontal lobe is going to shut down because it's going to think, hey, I'm supposed to go to sleep. That's not what meditation is. That's not what relaxation and healing is. What we want to do is keep that. That's the executive functioning of the brain. So we want to keep that awake. So as we keep that awake by sending energy in, so we're keeping the brain awake. It creates a Gaussian field that they can relax and visualize into. And then by getting the light into the brain as a side effect, we didn't even know this when we first started doing it. Now with all the research that's out there, we do a lot with traumatic brain injuries. And we know that by bringing light into the body through the ears, which the blood passes through the ears every 3 to 4 minutes. So we're blood doping. We're basically having the body absorb the photons. They go to the cells that aren't working right, like for the Lyme people that have the mitochondrial damage. That photon goes to that mitochondria and says, hey, borrow my photon. It goes in, starts up that cell. The Krebs cycle starts again and starts functioning the way it was supposed to. So energy is produced then. So even all the food and drink we have is really to convert to light in the body. So we're going to give the body photons. We're also going to, the eyes are not just attached to the brain. The eyes are literally brain matter. So when you're looking at somebody and say, wow, you got beautiful eyes, you're really complimenting their brain. So we want to get, we want to get light into the brain. And what happens through vasodilation, blood flow, circulation, is we're going to start to build not only neural pathways, but we're going to provide blood flow, circulation, and nutrients to those neurons so that it now can be fed and turned back on. So by lighting up the brain, we can't get it through the skull. We do have a brain wrap that we do wear, but the skull is so dense that even a laser can't penetrate it. So we've got to go through the orifices or through the suture points in the brain. So that's part of what we're doing. We're getting light into the brain to wake up the brain and really turn on. Every person listening on average out there has had over 2,000 brain traumas. And usually they happen before you were 5 years old. And I didn't really realize this. I'd read the research, but now that I have grandchildren and I see little Eli bumping his head on the counters and falling down, I'm going, man, and I know I was rougher than he was. There were 9 kids in my family, so you had to fight even for dinner. So there was, and I boxed, unfortunately, which was even worse for your brain. So all these things that happen, your body, we need to bring our body back. And as we get better looking and more intelligent with age, we need to do something to keep our brains about us, because the biggest fear out there, Scott, is not fear of public speaking anymore. The biggest fear is losing our memories. And the only way that we can preserve our memories is to preserve our brain, because our brain houses our access to those memories. Our subconscious, or they now know that we remember everything. It's our recall of that information that's so important. So we need to keep those neurons wiring and firing together, or firing and wiring together, however you want to think about that.
So let's talk about some of the things that BrainTap may help people with. You talked about getting into more of a parasympathetic mode. You talked about improving detoxification potentially. You talked about supporting the mitochondria. What are some of the other things that people might notice when they start using BrainTap, or some of the other ways that it's supporting the body?
Okay. Well, one thing is they now know, because of the research we have, that through the right messaging, we can turn on or off over 2,300 gene expressions. So when you're stressed out and worried, you're also turning them on and off. So let's turn those on. Let's turn on the healthy cells. Let's turn on the healthy part of ourselves. We have sessions that help people stop smoking, lose weight, deal with menopause. We have programs that work with people going through cancer treatment. We have over 800 sessions, and it just seems to keep growing, because it seems like the doctors we work with, which we have about 1,700 clinics out there using it, they're never satisfied. Somebody comes up with some other way. Like today, they want me to do a series for professional skaters because I worked with a couple Olympians, but I don't have a series for it. So now we're going to create a series for them. So It's not only for problem states. We can work with sports. We have a basketball series. We have a new program we did for football. So we can do, you can use your brain for good as well as for healing, for improving golf and different things like that.
So when we talk about BrainTap and we know that it can help the body with relieving stress or shifting us into that parasympathetic state, is that a momentary stress release, or does the system retrain the brain over time so that future stressors, we just don't respond in that same stressful way? I mean, do we need to continue using it, or does it ultimately create a more permanent pattern?
Well, there is no permanency in the nervous system. As long as there's going to be an environment that you live in. I tell people, if you could live on Gilligan's Island where you just think of a coconut cream pie and it shows up, the reality is that's not the life we live in. So when we're bombarded, especially with the electronic stress, the stressors that are out there, we need to do something daily. Now, you don't have to use the BrainTap daily, but if you have it, of course, you would use it. But think about it like inoculating yourself. You're going to go out into an environment that you're going to be hit with a lot of environmental toxins every day. And that's not just the news. It could be just the car you're driving, the home you live in, the people you work around. There are poison people out there, that we call them energy vampires. When you leave, your energy's gone. They're feeling great.
I call them cheese suckers.
Yeah, there you go. So exactly the same thing. So, but you can inoculate yourself against that, because as you do things like the BrainTap, we have measured, and we can, within 30 days, we can usually, the one study that we did, and we took this proposal and to MIT to show them the results of the BrainTap. And we had a 27.8% improvement with 50 people who did the BrainTap once a day. Once pre and post, they had about a 27% improvement. Within 30 days, if they used it 3 times a week, that became their new baseline. So now our goal was always in our clinics to get people over 80%. Unfortunately, when we measure people we have a BrainTap HRV system that we had designed in Russia. And we can measure the autonomic nervous system, what's going on. Most people, unfortunately, they're living on the negative side instead of the positive side of their nervous system, because they're basically always fighting uphill, because their bank account, in other words, they've withdrawn and they've borrowed against their future. And whether that's because they've been exposed to environmental toxins, or they've eaten poorly, or they've had an accident. But you can rebuild it. The nice thing about the body, especially the brain can rebuild itself at any age. It simply needs the right nutrients, the right environment to do that, and the right situation.
So let's talk a little. We've mentioned beta and alpha and theta, and probably listeners are not necessarily familiar with what those brainwave states are. So can you just kind of give us the high level of each one of those, what they are and what some of the characteristics of each would be?
Sure. So when we're talking right now, we're in a little bit of beta here. You're asking me questions. I'm reacting to those questions, having a conversation. Hopefully, if they're driving, listening to this, they're in beta. Beta, we call the reactionary mode. So think about it like and there's this part of our brain called the reticular activating system. And its whole job is to protect us. So it's always scanning our environment. Is this safe? Now what happens, let's say somebody has a mold disorder or something happens to them. Now they start to see mold everywhere. Well, the brain doesn't know the difference between real or imagined. So there's a cascade effect in the body, even if it's not real. It doesn't have to be real for it to affect the body. They know that thoughts are more powerful than things, because thoughts create the things that happen to our bodies. So in the reactionary mode, that's where fear, frustration, and anxiety reside. You need that mode, no matter how much you don't like it, you need it, or you wouldn't be able to function. Now, alpha is where like creative people go. They claim that Einstein hung out in alpha quite a lot. That's why he could, there's a story of him giving a lecture at Princeton, and he walked away from the chalkboard to go do something just walked away, did something over at the desk for an hour and a half. Of course, all the students are still there. They're waiting for him. He comes right back to right where he was and takes up the lecture. Most people can't do that, but it's because he doesn't occupy the same space. When you're an alpha, there's no space. That's why he actually is fond of saying that if you're around beautiful women for an hour, it seems like a minute. If you're sitting on a hot stove for a minute, it seems like an hour. Because time is distorted in alpha and theta. There is no time. In fact, in both alpha and theta, there's what's called hypermnesia, super memory. So when you get to alpha is where your creative self, your problem solving. If somebody is autistic, I can probably, without question, guarantee you that they are functioning at 10% or less alpha activity. In fact, most don't have any activity in alpha at all. It's like there's a void there. They can't make the jump. That's why they hit somebody, and the autistic child doesn't know they're hurting them because they don't have any empathy. That's the brainwave that does that.
So are they always then in beta for the most part?
They're either in beta stimming, where they're throwing off the energy, or they're in theta, they're disassociated. That's why there's so many books written about disassociated kids, because when they're in theta, which is the next state I want to talk about, theta is that super creative state where when you read about these geniuses that like Edison, Einstein, and Tesla, they would go into these creative states, these deep contemplative states, because that's where you have access to this vast resource of knowledge that we have. This really, if you think about it, we have this computer brain really that everybody talks about how potential it is. They now know that one neuron has the potential of computing power of a Cray computer. So Cray computer is the most sophisticated computer we have. So we have 100 billion of those. So if we could get access to those, now in theta, this hypermnesia state happens where when you hear something there, that's why in our programming, we use a lot of theta programs to get people there, because we want them to basically take the message and learn it. I'll give you an example of how theta works. Every listener out there has probably at one time or another woke up and had a song playing in the room. Maybe they didn't like the song, but that song stuck in their head all day. That's because they heard it in theta. That's hypermnesia, super memory. Now, the next night, of course, you go to bed, flushes it out. It's not important. But if that was an important message and you heard it over and over again every morning when you woke up, that would just become a part of your nature. It would just be a part of your track of who you are. Now, delta, which is the deep sleep I was talking about, there's no programming in delta. It's unconsciousness. That's the rest, recovery, reboot state. That's what you need for healing of the body. A lot of people have heard of super learning or sleep learning. It doesn't happen in delta. It happens because during the night, you're going through these cycles of sleep. When you're in alpha and theta, you are able to absorb information from the room around you. If you've ever tried to wake somebody up to fall asleep on the couch and they don't move, their arms limp, but then like 20 minutes later, they're rolling around, they're up. It's because they were in deep delta during the time you were trying to wake them up before. So all of these brainwaves are important. In fact, one of the brainwaves they now is getting more and more press out there in research is gamma, which is just above beta. They now know gamma is so important in breaking down amyloid plaque in the brain. What we showed MIT was that doing a BrainTap session increases gamma by over 23%. So wow. What that does is you don't need, they were doing this research with blue light at 40 hertz frequency. Well, that could also stimulate seizures. So I'm not really a big fan of 40 hertz frequency, but that's gamma. But the reason that it happens is when you're in alpha, that's why a lot of people when they meditate, they get into the state of alpha. That's a modulating frequency. It's like a tuning fork. So if you have a tuning fork and you click it, and there's another tuning fork around it or just close to that same frequency, you can start that tuning fork going. The same thing is true with brainwaves. So as you go through these different brainwaves, it's almost like an oscillating effect of tuning forks that the brain starts to oscillate and operate at this higher frequency. And gamma is that frequency that gets triggered.
You mentioned that most autistic children are missing alpha, and my understanding from listening to some of your earlier talks as well is that adults are often missing theta as well, correct?
Yes, that's why they have trouble sleeping. It's like jumping the Grand Canyon, you're Evel Knievel. It sounds good on paper, but you don't want to do it. They can't go from being in that creative state or that wide awake state into delta. So we have to train them to have more theta activity. That's why I would say 70% of our sessions are geared toward building more theta activity.
So when we use BrainTap and we go through these different states, and you talked about how it essentially kind of simulates a full sleep cycle in a very short period of time in a 25, 30-minute session. So is it then by going through that several times that we're then more able to, in a healthy way, kind of move between these different states, and the ones that we're maybe not able to be in very much now, that we're able to have more balance between those different states? Is that really the goal?
That's exactly it. We want to have behavioral flexibility. It's not about one being more important than any other, because if we don't have beta when we're doing our taxes, we might get a visit from a 3-letter agency. So if you're trying to be in beta, but you're trying to do drama, let's say, or creative problem solving, that's not going to work either. That's why the most powerful people, those people that get paid the most in business, are those people that can problem solve. Because it's very hard to take a logical state and creative state at the same time. People that do that, they're using their whole brain. That's when those people are paid a lot of money, and they're very resourceful, because most people, one brain literally collapses under stress. They become more right-brained, or they become more left-brained under stress, and that's where the problem resides.
So you talked about binaural beats, for example, the isochronic tones. Talk a little about the different technologies or algorithms. I mean, one thing that really interested me is you intersected a lot of different techniques and tools into this one device. So what are some of those different technologies or algorithms?
Well, the main algorithm is that if somebody let's say that we want to help somebody with learning and brain, because people they don't want dementia. Okay, so we have a brain fitness series. So that one actually is training SMR frequencies, sensory motor rhythm frequencies. This is the brainwave that usually goes first as we grow with age, because it's a buffer frequency. You can break these frequencies down into like 13 different bands. So it's between beta and alpha. And in between there's a sensory motor rhythm. If you don't have that, you don't have balance, you don't have cognitive thinking, you don't have recall. So we have a different training that activates different parts of the brain at different times. The secret here is not one algorithm. We have 800 different algorithms. Every session is different. So each time you do it, the brain literally it's really being stressed out, if you can kind of think about it that way, but it's being stressed in a fun way, like playing a game, like if you played tennis, for instance. If you know how to play tennis, then it can be a fun game. If you don't know how to play tennis and somebody's putting it all over the place, you've got to do a lot of coordination. You got to do high-level physics to hit that ball back, but you're not even thinking about it, but your brain is doing all that work. Mm-hmm. So, you're also getting your body, which is a very kinesthetic. So we have these emotions that trigger actions. The thoughts trigger emotions, which trigger actions. And if this is all coordinated together, then we get a great result. If not, it can become a stressful experience for people.
One of the things that I think is exciting too is you use auricular medicine or auricular therapy, the idea that there's a representation of all of the different points in the body in the ears, and that affects the meridian system as well. So using the lights that are in the headset itself, we're also then having a distant effect throughout the entire body in the meridian system as well, are we not?
Yes. So for those that don't understand this, basically, just like the eyes, you can look at the representation of the eyes, and there's a representation there of all the rest of the body. So it's true in the ears. So they can take needles and they can use those pressure points and put needles in, or rocks or stones or whatever. What we found is that we can also use light. So some people will actually tell us, hey, my ear is getting really warm. My right ear is getting really warm. What's going on? Well, there's a blockage there. Keep using it. In about 2 or 3 sessions, it's almost like a drain happens and energy runs through the system. So these meridian lines are like highways for the body's energy system.
I actually felt that warmth myself in both sessions. So that's interesting that you say that.
Yeah, so it's going to start running energy, and you're going to teach. The main thing, we're energy beings. We're photonic beings. When you walk into a room, you really share all your photons, because you're giving off light and you're absorbing light all the time. So, but the problem is that's why energy medicine is so important now, and is getting its due out there. But a lot of people don't know how to run energy. They're always looking to someone else for that energy. Their brain, they've never done like Tai Chi or relaxation. When we test people, the healthiest people that we test before they start using BrainTap, of course, is people who do yoga, like yoga instructors, because they're doing breathing work and they're moving, because oxygen also moves these meridian points and moves this energy through the body. Dancers, that's why it's so important. A lot of chiropractors, after they're done doing the adjustment, will send people out to learn how to dance, because they got to get the body moving again, and that moves energy. If you're sitting around all day, that's why they say sitting is the new smoking, right? So we might want to get up and move. And then martial artists, because you're moving your whole body and you're learning different logical steps. Those 3 groups always tend to score the best in our heart rate variability testing, just because that's who they are. Now, we can also tell when somebody overtrains. Like when we're working with Olympic athletes, sometimes they train too much. The body needs downtime just as much as it needs that uptime. But they don't want to do that. A lot of people think, I got to train harder, I got to train faster. No, sometimes you got to just let the body rebuild.
So if we look at Lyme disease and mold illness and these other kind of related conditions, there's talk about genetic predispositions. And sometimes people even lose their hope that they can get well because they have this idea that they have genes that are impaired and there's just no hope. They can't get better. They see their MTHFR, their HLA-DR, whatever genes they're looking at, and they really do lose hope in a lot of cases. And so I think there's also those of us that don't focus so much on the genes, but focus on epigenetics. What are those things with nutrition and stress and so on that can influence the expression of our genes through our environment and our thoughts and so on. So what role does BrainTap play in being able to influence gene expression in a positive way?
Well, one of our professors at Quantum University is Bruce Lipton. And so I recommend anybody who's a little confused to read Biology of Belief, because he, in fact, just in the news here in the last 5 years, they kind of junked out the idea that we can control our human destiny by controlling our genes. Only 20% of our gene expression is hereditary. 80% is by our thoughts, actions, beliefs, the people we hang around. Our environment controls more to do with our gene expression than our family history. So what the BrainTap does is we start to change our gene expression, because what we think about, we bring about. And that's on every level, on the cellular level. So if I start to get, as an example for the listeners, if I ask you to remember your happiest memory, some people will think, wow, my wedding day, that was great. Some people go, the day I got divorced. So it just depends on what they're doing. So when they have these, whatever that happy memory was, your brain had to create that chemical corresponding reaction. The gene expression for happiness shows up. And when we're happy, those happiness genes, if you will, our body functions better. People say, like when you're in love, people go, you're just glowing. Well, that's because the happiness gene is going crazy. They don't care if the toothpaste's soft, if the underwear in the middle of the floor. They're in heaven. Now, if that keeps going, then those things lose their shine and they become negative. So as you're doing the BrainTap, what we want to do is, if you're thinking negative thoughts all the time, because that's the kind of world you think you live in, or it's a threatening place, then something's going to happen. All you have to do is look to doctors. When you look at, when doctors go into areas where there's severe critical conditions that they should be getting sick, why aren't these doctors getting sick? Because they think that they're immune to it. And if you think you are, you are. At some level, I mean, sooner or later, you can't do it all the time, but basically when you're positive, you're optimistic, you're eating healthy, you're thinking healthy, you're getting the proper rest, relaxation you need, your immune system is on, it's working like it's supposed to, but if our immune system is always, and they know psychosomatically now, which means of the mind, for those listening, if you're fearful of everything, your immune system is taxed 24/7. Because there's this psychoimmunity too. Your psychology affects your immune system. One of the things in research that they found out was when they started doing these these allergy commercials, their sales of allergy medicine went through the roof because they're triggering these allergens. I'm doing fine. And now people turn on their television. What's the allergy count today? Well, what? That's like saying, is it raining today? Should I feel good or bad? We need to take back control of our physiological state. Yeah, there could be a lot of allergens, and some people are predisposed to that. So we have to be prepared for that, but we don't have to fall prey to it. We don't have to. You can almost predict your demise if you start thinking those negative thoughts and continue on that negative path. What's better is to become optimistic. In fact, I had a business partner once that said, Patrick, you're too damn happy. Nobody's that happy all the time, right? Because my nickname's Dr. Positive, right? And I said, I'd rather be happy most of the time than be mad, angry, and upset all the time. Some people are just so negative. They go, I'm not going to get happy because the other shoe's going to drop or whatever. And somebody, when you can know this when you ask somebody, hey, how you doing? So far, so good.
Like they're waiting for the bad.
Right. The universe is going, some things around the corner are going to jump on them, and make their life terrible. When it should be, wow, life's wonderful. It's great. Today's a great day to be alive. You can start to pretend that, and your immune system starts to mirror that activity because it's directly linked to your physiological, psychological state.
One of the big challenges in people with chronic illness of many types is sleep. And that's such an important thing to get in order to heal. So many people that I talk with have insomnia. They don't sleep well. A lot of them are on pharmaceutical medications, which may make them feel like they're sleeping. But my understanding is it doesn't have the same true restorative sleep potential as if you're doing it more naturally. And so I think sleep is really at the top of the list in terms of things that we need to do in order to heal. And so tell us a little about how BrainTap supports sleep improvement. And in those that have sleep issues, how often does the system seem to improve their sleep cycle?
Right. Typically, we have about a 90%. When we've done studies, we go to a lot of shows, clinical shows, and we started to evaluate, hey, if you have a sleep issue, we want you to come back tomorrow and tell us how you're doing. And we did this at a big event called the Parker Seminar, which is thousands of chiropractors. And we had about a 92% success, positive result in hotel rooms of people that weren't sleeping well. And the reason was that the brain simply, the habit, like your buddy was talking about, your friend that you're talking about, your mentor, the brain has a habit of being highly stressed. So then what happens is when they go to sleep, their body is in this fight or flight all day long. Then they sit down to sleep and the brain goes, now we can deal with all the things we have for today. It doesn't know how to get out of that beta brain and get into that alpha, theta, delta cycle. It needs to learn. So we basically, the first thing we do is teach the brain how to return back to its natural cycle, its natural rhythm. It's natural to go to sleep. When somebody says, I sleep like a baby, they don't mean up every 2 hours and crying all night. Usually they mean, I didn't hear a sound, I slept through the night, great. And that's the way we're designed to sleep. But when illness happens or something critical happens, we get stuck in beta. Then what happens is we're not able to go down into the alpha and theta. So the brainwave training that we give with BrainTap literally trains the brain to go there. Then the brain goes, oh, I remember what that was like because I used to do that as a kid. Now it can remember and go back to doing that. And usually after about 3 or 4 weeks, they don't need to listen to the insomnia sessions anymore. They just listen to whatever they want.
Wow. Let's go back to the topic of emotions a little. So I think in chronic illnesses, whether or not emotional conflicts and traumas set the stage for illness or the result of going through a chronic illness itself can be a significant trauma. I think that does play a key role, this idea of emotions and emotional states. So what role does BrainTap have in terms of helping the body to be able to process past conflicts and traumas that might be holding us back from really regaining better health?
Well, mainly when you're in that high fight or flight, that beta consciousness, you're creating the emotions. The energy that becomes motion becomes negative emotions because that's the state you're in. And we need those. Fear is not bad when it's used appropriately. I mean, you want to be fearful of walking out in front of traffic or, jumping off 3-story buildings and things like that. But you don't need fear every time you do something. Some people just overdo it, or they watch movies that create and exacerbate the fear. So what BrainTap does is it helps you to focus on positive events. And I tell people we have these brain circuits. And to use an analogy, if people that are out there that have learned to speak more than one language, they can learn other languages much quicker because that circuitry in the brain never shuts off. If you learn 2 languages before you're 7 years old. Now, if you're like me, unfortunately, I learned English and that was it. Then when I go to college, I got to learn another language. It was hard, because the brain circuits weren't there. Well, that's for learning a language. So we have brain circuits for everything. So if we have this brain circuit that says, hey, we're supposed to be fearful when we go outside. I still remember my younger sister, she wouldn't go to the store without her younger sister, and I'm going, what's Fran going to do for you? She's like 7 years old, but she wouldn't leave the house without her because she was so afraid, but she loved watching Freddy Krueger movies. I said, Sarah, stop watching. There's no Freddy Krueger, but in her mind, there was. So sometimes, and think of people reading, I think Stephen King's probably a really gifted writer, but I've only read a handful of his books because I'm not going to sit there and read a book that's going to fill my brain with such negativity, even though they're very well written. He's a great author, but why?
Right. There is a lot of talk these days about the vagus nerve and different types of vagal stimulators and so on, and the role of that in terms of overall systemic health. Does BrainTap play a role in terms of the vagus nerve in any way?
Yeah, we actually have a whole series for primitive reflexes. what we do is the doctors usually will trigger them with lasers or light or whatever other stimulus they have. And then once that's done, because when you make an adjustment in the body, 30% of the nervous system's in the body, 70% of the nervous system's in the brain. So regardless of what you do anywhere in the body, you're really adjusting the brain. So any adjustment in the brain needs an adjustment, in the body, or you can adjust the brain, but it's easier if you, for instance, when we're working with traumatic brain injuries or pain, we're going to stimulate the vagus nerve back here. We're going to have them use a light pad on the back of the head because that light flow, blood flow circulation is going to unlock that primitive reflex. So there's a lot, and there are people out there. We have a few different doctor groups that have some really good methods for that. I'm not an expert at that, but what I did was I created the psychological part of it, the psycho-emotional part, because if you believe it, let's say that it's done and the doctors release that and now it's functioning the way it is. You don't have that reflex, that moral reflex or whatever is the primitive reflex you're working on. But then your thinking goes back to normal. You're going to recreate that pattern because it's a top-down system.
Let's talk a little bit about Lyme disease for just a minute. So in Lyme disease, people have chronic infections, Borrelia, Bartonella, Babesia, all of these other things that are playing a role. So what is it that BrainTap potentially does to help balance and modulate the immune system, making us more equipped to be able to handle these chronic infections? What is it that you're hearing from people with Lyme disease that are using the system, and how is it supporting them?
Mm-hmm. Well, most of the time we're working with a doctor or a health professional that's doing something other than just BrainTap. So I don't want people to think, hey, I can buy the BrainTap and then I'm totally cured of Lyme disease. What we do is, let's say that you're taking the nice supplements, everything you're doing, but you're so stressed out, the body's not metabolizing it. So think of the BrainTap as getting the body back to its innate healing potential. Now we still need the right supplements, we still need the right rest, relax, everything we need, but they're not able to get there because their brain is so fixated on the problem. We can boost the immune system by boosting the relaxation response. That's the key thing that we do. And then the other is, you have to think, if on a trip of 1,000 miles, if you don't know where you're going, you don't have a map, it can seem like eternity. But if you start visualizing there's an end to this suffering, there's an end to this, I can get better, then your subconscious, if you will, starts to basically bring about all of the changes that need to take place so you can get that end result, because the brain works best with an end result in mind. If somebody's like going through this on their own and they don't have the right psychological makeup, let's say, where they don't think they're ever going to get out of it. Unfortunately, I've heard a lot of people say, I'm a Limey. They're owning it, almost like an alcoholic. The reality is they're not a Limey. The number one law of psychology states you can't be a behavior. You can't be an affliction. You are a person. And most people don't know the definition of human means God and man. You meaning God. So you have this potential, and God gave us this potential to heal. But the problem is that these disorders like Lyme disorder, it's pretty powerful.
Right.
There are doctors out there that are getting some great results with it. And we're working with some of them because once that happens, again, maybe you're never going to get over it, because I'm not the one who can predict that. But in most cases, you can build your immune system back up so that at least you don't have so many bad days. You have more good days than you have bad days.
And I think the detoxification component that you talked about, that's such a key as well, right? It comes back to the terrain, and these microbes are not going to be staying in a terrain that is not supportive of them being there. And so if this system can also, through its ability to help us relax and detoxify, I think then we're shifting the terrain. And I agree with what you're saying. It's not a standalone tool for someone that's dealing with Lyme disease, but it sounds like it supports the body in many ways. Sleep, detoxification, all of those things are so key. When we look at the nervous system, things like POTS or postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, dysautonomias of different types, those are also things that I wouldn't say they're incredibly common, but they are fairly common in the Lyme and mold community as well. So since BrainTap is helping to support the autonomic nervous system, have you seen people with POTS or dysautonomias that have benefited from your system?
Yes, and also we're always talking about changing posture. Think of your body like an antenna. it's picking up frequencies. I tell people it's like when I was younger, we'd watch Tiger baseball in Detroit, around Detroit, and the only way we saw it was holding on the antenna and adjusting our bodies. If our shoulders are rolled back, our chins rolled up, we're breathing properly, we're going to set our body up for a more healing and healthy environment. So I think that the key thing here is we've got to have, it's not a one size fits all. I was going to say about the other question too, is that we're going to help to bridge that brain gut axis. The gut is another brain. And a lot of times when that gets screwed up, it can screw up the whole rest of the body. And so we have to, and that's part of the relaxation response, is getting that back. So there's 3 nervous systems that we usually talk about: the brain, the gut, and then the real nervous system, which is our hands and legs and how our body moves. They all have to work together kind of synergistically. And so, but as your body, you put your body in that parasympathetic state, the innate intelligence of the body knows what to do. So it's not like we're doing anything. We're just getting it into the right environment for the body to do it. And then if you're taking the right supplements, doing the right training, then good things happen.
Another common topic in the realm of Lyme and mold is this mast cell activation syndrome, histamine intolerance, kind of extending on that, the idea of people who are universal reactors and kind of react to everything, even to the supplements that their doctor's recommending. So can the BrainTap system potentially help those people that are so reactive in creating more tolerance so that they can either tolerate their environment better or make better use of the other therapeutic interventions that their practitioner is suggesting?
Yeah, I think that's one of the key things that we do, because there's when you talk about allergies, and how the body kind of treats things like allergens and things like that in the system, that's an overreaction of the immune system. If it was balanced, it wouldn't do that. It would just send out enough that it would take care of the problem. But because it's gearing up for war, it's overproducing it. Then it starts kind of going against itself, so we know that with some of the technologies, they've done some studies where up to 40% of the people can be helped. So it's not 100%, but we've had even allergies. We've been able to, with psychoimmunology, they don't have to take their allergy medicine anymore because their body was able to adjust it through their thinking instead of just through something they're taking. Although the placebo effect is still the strongest, supplement we have. But some people are getting the nocebo effect, and that's more what you're talking about. The body is reacting negatively to things it should be acting positively to.
Mm-hmm, exactly. One of the other common challenges in people with Lyme is this also having the situation where they're living or working in a water-damaged building, a moldy environment. I know that you've collaborated with Terry Wright with the Pure Air Doctor team on some programs that might help people in that realm as well. So does the system potentially help us to become less sensitive and less reactive to our environment from that perspective?
Yes, I think the main thing it does is help you to recoup, to recover. I mean, I think we're all going to be exposed at some point if you go through nobody lives in a pristine environment. I live in North Carolina, so there's a lot of mold here. That's just the environment that we live in. But how does the body bounce back? When we're exposed to it, can we recover? And so I think the main thing is that we don't want to get stuck in those states. We don't want those stuck states where the body just starts to exacerbate the negative effects of whether it be mold or whatever other allergen might be in the area.
Anxiety and depression, very common issues in people dealing with a long-term chronic illness. Is that an area that people commonly have some relief using the BrainTap system?
Yeah, we have to be very careful about diagnostic diseases or whatever they call them. But yeah, what we do is you can't simultaneously be depressed and moving toward a goal at the same time. So if you start moving towards something like health and healing, and your total focus is on that, it's going to be different than focusing on your disease and some people they become ill and all they do is they focus on their disease, their problem, what they're going to do about their problem. That's not why the disease is a symptom of something. You need to move through it and move back to health and balance and harmony in the body. That's pretty difficult without some help. I think that's where things like the BrainTap come in, is that we want to help them to stay positive during this time. Like when we have a program called Coping with Cancer. We can't cure cancer, but what we can do is we can help people while they're getting their chemotherapy or their radiation. We have people now that they can get the radiation treatment, use the BrainTap afterwards, and drive themselves home. They don't have to doesn't have to knock their immune system out forever. Now, we also have a program called Say No to Cancer, which is with people that don't want to use any medical intervention, that it's their choice on how they do it. So it really, we have to work within their belief systems, but our job is or my belief is that people use a very small percentage of their own potential, and especially for healing. So I feel like one of our jobs at BrainTap is to help people activate their full potential.
One of the people that I spoke with recently that got me interested in the BrainTap system had indicated they were actually doing fairly well. I would say probably 90% recovered from Lyme and mold, started using the BrainTap system, and then noticed that their energy significantly improved. So low energy, fatigue, those are common issues that people with Lyme and chronic fatigue syndrome and related conditions are dealing with. You mentioned that the photons can help to activate the mitochondria as well. So do you fairly commonly hear from people that they notice their energy is improving as they continue using the system?
Yes, and one of the reasons it's the lightest part of it, but also we collect energy. We use energy in beta, but we collect energy in alpha and theta. So that means think of our body as we're collecting. That's why when you're doing your hobby, you don't go, oh man, I'm so tired of doing this golf thing, or writing or drawing or whatever it is. You could do that forever. But you're doing your taxes, you go, oh my God, I don't want to do that anymore. Because beta uses energy, alpha and theta collects energy. So if you're doing something, that's why they say if you do something you love, you never work a day in your life. It's because when you're doing those in that brainwave state where you're collecting energy. Now, if you're focusing your attention on your illness, that takes a lot of energy. That's that habit that you're talking about. The brain has to have a habit of doing it. What if they forgot about that? I mean, they've seen people that have split personalities. They have a disease in one personality and not in another. The only thing that changes is their neural makeup. They neurologically changed positions. And in the one position, they don't have the illness. In the other position, they do. So what if you just decided today you're going to change your position? That was an old you. You're going to repattern your whole nervous system after a healthy you. The potential's there.
Inflammation and pain, also very common issues in people with Lyme disease, fibromyalgia. I know you have programs in the BrainTap system that help in that area as well. So maybe you can just tell us a little about that, some of the feedback you get around inflammation and pain reduction with the use of the system.
Well, the key to that is that pain only happens in beta. And beta isn't a bad guy, but you only experience, if you have a high degree, you show me somebody in pain with these problems, I'm going to show you somebody that has a high degree of beta activity in their brain. We all should be in pain, but what happens is when we're in alpha and theta, our brain creates a neurochemicals that causes the pain to diminish. It buffers that pain in our body. We don't feel it. And like with fibromyalgia, we don't have the chemicals falling out of solution and crystallizing around our joints and things like that, or under the myelin sheath or whatever's going on. The body stays in a flow state. So it's all about being in flow. We find the reason that our equipment was designed in the 80s actually was we were biofeedback technicians. There was no neurofeedback back then. And we were trying to get people to do things like warm their hands up, work on their respiration. And when you're in pain, you can't do that. When your hands are warm, you can't have a headache. Because in order to warm your hands up, you have to create alpha. We didn't know that then. We just knew they had to have warm hands. And so all of this has to do with how our body is responding. So when somebody's in a high stress, they're trying to heal, they say, you can't try to heal. You just got to let it heal. You got to get into that relaxed state. That's why the let go and let God part is so important, is to let your own body's innate intelligence. We have the potential. We just have to unlock that potential. And that's what the BrainTap does, is part of the equation.
Let's talk a little bit about tinnitus. That is a condition for which there aren't a lot of great solutions. I've heard people suggest that it's not really an ear problem, but a brain problem. I've also heard people suggest that the more you focus on it, the more difficult it is to kind of let it go, or for the brain to stop sensing it as much. So have you had any people that have commented around tinnitus and use of the system as well?
We haven't had a lot, but we've had some people tell us that their tinnitus went away and they asked what happened. And the only thing I can say is that it could have been a neurological issue, just like when you have neuropathy in your feet or hands. That's a blood flow problem. It's actually a nutrient problem. So when the blood flow isn't going there, the nutrients aren't going there, the nerves die. But one thing about our body is they don't really ever die. They're still there. If you give them blood flow, circulation, and nutrients, they're going to rebuild themselves. So in that area, that's what the lights in the ears. We've had people tell us, I used to have poor hearing, but now what happened? Why is that happening? Well, when you get blood flow circulation into those areas, the body knows what to do.
Yeah, that's amazing. Let's talk a little bit about electromagnetic radiation, electromagnetic fields, another one of the environmental impacts that certainly are stressing our systems. And so if this is a source of ongoing brain stress that's also keeping us in a sympathetic dominant state, does BrainTap or can BrainTap support those that are electrically hypersensitive to EMFs and EMRs? And then I'm also interested, when you're using the connection, you provide a wire in the package as well to connect directly from the phone to the headset. Does that mean then that the Bluetooth piece is completely off and there is no EMF coming from the headset?
Yes, that's true. But even with our Bluetooth, we have nil EMF in our device. We had it checked in Russia and also in India at 2 different laboratories. And that's because blue light at 533 frequency cancels out EMF. So you don't have any when you're wearing it. But there's a lot of bad press about blue light. But if blue light was so bad, we wouldn't have blue skies. What's bad is the 487 frequency blue light that's in our LED screens. But nobody's telling you that. It's not just blue light. A lot of people think, oh, blue light's bad. No, blue light itself is really good for us. It builds collagen. It has a lot of really nice triggering effects. It's also the safest for the brain because we live in a blue light world. And so part of that is what's going on is how do we use technology? There's a lot of misinformation out there, or people talking about half-truths because they haven't done the research. They just, if you were to look at your computer screen right before we're going to bed, yeah, you're gonna be disrupting, because the computer, they don't care when they build the computers in most cases of the field that it's creating. You'd be throwing off a lot of EMF. I mean, if you come into my office, I have a lot of technology around here to buffer all the technology, and I think everyone needs it. It's kind of like vitamins nowadays. You can't avoid this electronic smog, unless you just don't want to use a phone. You don't want to use technology. I mean, even cars today, they're full of technology. You're driving them. And so, there's a lot, but there's, like Terry with his work, he has a lot of solutions for people, and people should look into it and start getting the help. Even my phone has a case on it because I don't want to feel anything. I want to have that case around it.
Yep. In fact, I think it looks like we have almost the same case there.
Yep, it is the same when I see the logo. Yep.
Let's talk just a little bit about neuroplasticity. And so there are systems out there that people are having very good results with, from my perspective, and I won't name specific systems, but in terms of helping to change the limbic system's response to various stressors. And so is there some overlap between those systems of neuroplasticity or limbic system retraining and what's happening with the BrainTap system? Does it also affect the limbic system?
Yes, because the emotional states are going to be changed or shift at that point, that part of the brain. I think that there are, we're going to see more and more of this because people are understanding more about the brain. We just have a very affordable solution. We did a test up against some like magnetic resonant therapy centers. There's a lot of different ones of those. And those force the brain to change, like to create more alpha, because that's one of the solutions for autism. So what I did is I took all the people that they said couldn't work with magnetic resonant therapy, and we showed them that we could change it with brainwave entrainment. And ours lasted, like theirs, within 30 days, they almost went back to the same brainwave state. So they had to keep getting this $30,000 treatment a month. Wow. Ours, with a $500 solution, could do it at least once or twice a week and maintain that change in training of the brain waves. So there's different ways to do it. And in my case, I'm not an expert at that at all, but I do know that because we have some crossover there, that we're affecting that part of the brain. And, that's why we're bringing in the light therapy, really, in the primitive reflexes and that, because that kind of bypasses the critical thinking of the person and gets right to the emotional, if you will, or the kind of programming that our body has, our nervous system has.
So when someone's using the device, how often should they do it? Is it every day? Is there a particular time of day that's better, or some sessions better in the morning and others better at night? How do you decide how to actually implement the device?
Okay. Great question. First of all, the nervous system resets itself every 72 hours. So if you want to improve the nervous system, you've got to do something within that 72-hour window. So whatever you do, even a supplement, it's a halo effect if you take it less frequently, like they say 1 a day or whatever the deal is. The reason is because the body, there's different cycles for the body. For the nervous system, that cycle happens to be 72 hours. So with the BrainTap, we recommend no less than 3 times a week as a minimum, 3 times a day as a maximum, really. And you could do it in the morning. We have programs we call AM programs. We call it digital coffee because they're designed to wake up the brain. They're that SMR training to get the brain in gear for cognitive thinking, problem solving, or exercise routines and things like that. The sessions in the middle of the day, most of them are for that. That's like a reboot. So if you come home from work and you feel drained, you're not able to give your family the time it needs, or you're not able to have a life afterwards, you do a 20-minute session in the evening. That's really going to reboot you. For most people, that's all they need. But if you're having trouble sleeping at night, you can listen to any number of our PM programs, our Better Sleep program, and those literally take you and drop you off into Delta. So instead of them, all of our sessions bring you back up into Alpha, and then you wake yourself up, except for the PM programs and the Better Sleep programs. Oh. We also have, for those of listeners out there that are biofeedback or neurofeedback technicians, we have about 100 sessions that just support neurofeedback and biofeedback. So if you know what your brain's doing, we actually have brainwave entrainment specific for those brainwaves. Or if you have the right brain problem or a left brain problem, we have sessions specific for those.
Wow, that's fantastic. So the last question that I have is the same that I ask every guest, which is, what are some of the key things that you do on a daily basis in support of your own health?
Okay. Well, every day I do a BrainTap session. I've been doing it. Somebody asked me a long time ago, is this addictive? I said, I don't know. I've been doing it since 1986. And I think I was doing meditation before then, because I made my first meditation tape actually when I was 12 years old. My dad trained me how to do that. But we have a vibrational bed. It's from Kinetic Harmonies, and they built it for us. It's called the Oasis bed for us, and it has sound therapy. So we have it here at the office, and every staff person can take a break, listen to a BrainTap session on that magnetic bed. We also have the light therapy. We have the biomat. We have a lot of different, and usually we use them all in combination because you got 20 minutes, you're going to load up your body. I do that every day. I exercise 3 times a week as a minimum, usually every day, go for a walk. Because I know walking is really great for your nervous system, especially to offset and help your memory. I mean, if being sedentary, like what I'm doing right now, I have a stand-up desk so that I can stand up. I also have a desk behind me I can sit down on every once in a while, but mostly using a stand-up desk. Those are things that I find work well, and I eat as clean as I can. Unfortunately, I travel about 43 times a year, so it's kind of sometimes a little more difficult. But when I can, we actually rent houses and we go to the grocery store, the Whole Foods, or if we can, and get good foods or the healthy food choices and make our own meals. Sometimes we can't do that, but most of the time we do.
Excellent. Wow, I learned a lot in this conversation. I was already excited about BrainTap and getting the opportunity to start using it. Now I'm even more excited. And so I think in the realm of, chronic health challenges, there is often this sympathetic, parasympathetic issue that we need to look at in terms of getting into a state of being able to heal and kind of enabling that opportunity. And so I'm excited about your technology. I want to thank you for the time that you've spent with us today, educating us, and just honor you for your work. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you. To learn more about today's guest, visit braintaptechnology.com. That's braintaptechnology.com. braintaptechnology.com. Thanks for your interest in today's show. If you'd like to follow me on Facebook or Twitter, you can find me there as Better Health Guy. To support the show, please visit betterhealthguy.com/donate. If you'd like to be added to my newsletter, visit betterhealthguy.com/newsletters. And this and other shows can be found on YouTube, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and Spotify.
Thanks for listening to this Better Health Guy blogcast with Scott, your Better Health Guy. To check out additional shows and learn more about Scott's personal journey to better health, please visit betterhealthguy.com.